Hello, it is Sunday here. Beautiful Sunday morning, bright sunshine. We are going to be continuing on with Unit 6, and the two modules we're going to be covering today are 50 and 51. And 50 has to do with sexual development, and the last unit has to do with aging, adulthood and aging. And we did put them together because I just want to tell you up front that there is a lot of information that you will see on the slides, because I actually combined the two set of slides together. And we are not going to cover most of it because a lot of these two units, there's some general information, and I would like you to take some time to read through it, just for your own, knowledge about human development. But it's just not a lot of it is covered on the AP exam, and we are definitely at a place where we're accelerating. We are going to go through the information, the curriculum a little bit more quickly as we approach the AP exam in May. Okay, so just to give you a heads up with that, and let's get started here. All right, let's get to the slideshow. All right, so as I mentioned, the first module is module 50, sexual development. We are going to just be doing more about defining terms and doing some review. A lot of this information you do learn in your health class. So just one quick thing when it comes to recognizing what sex you are born and how that comes to be. Which chromosomes come from the father? Well, from the father came the one chromosome out of 46 that is not unisex, either another X chromosome making a female or a Y chromosome making a male. And what are the changes that occur in the fetal stage? So during the 4th and 5th prenatal months, sex hormones bathe the fetal brain and influence its wiring. Different patterns for males and females develop under the influence of the male greater testosterone and the female's ovarian hormone. So what that means is basically that, at a certain point in about the 4th or 5th month, prenatal month, that the hormones are going to play a big part, and more testosterone for males and more of the ovarian hormones for females. And so developing different primary and secondary sex characteristics. All right, so throughout childhood, boys and girls are similar in height, but as you know it, that about age 14 that the boys start to overtake in average height. So, but right before that, girls actually surged. And what are some other physical changes that happen during development that have to do with our sexual maturity? And as I mentioned before, there's something called primary sex characteristics. And during the growth spurts, during puberty, these things occur. So the primary sex characteristics are the reproductive organs and external genitalia that make sexual reproduction possible, and they develop dramatically. And then the non-reproductive secondary sex characteristics, girls develop breasts, large hips, boys' facial hair begin growing, their voices deepen, and the pubic and underarm hair emerges in both boys and girls. So those are the secondary sex characteristics. All right, so let's do a little quick review here. Which of the following is a primary sex characteristic that changes at puberty? And that is C, full development of external genitalia in both sexes. All right, so here's a review of all the different changes that do occur during puberty. You don't have to memorize all of them, but just to kind of get a general idea. All right. And there's a lot of hormonal release at this stage. And what is intersex? A condition present at birth due to unusual combinations of male and female chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy, possessing biological sexual characteristics of both sexes. This is rare. For example, a genetic male may be born with normal male hormones and testes, but no penis or a micropenis. Such individuals may struggle with their gender identity. So we do need to define the term, but like I said, it is rare. All right, so one of the things that they talk about, there's a lot of discussion in this particular module that we just do not have time to go through, but it is important for you to look through it. is looking at what are some of the environmental factors that determine whether someone is more likely to become sexually active or not. And some of the environmental factors is whether there's been communication about birth control, the level of alcohol use among the teen, the level of impulsivity, and exposure to mass media. So you could probably predict that there is a positive correlation. So the more impulsivity that a teen engages in or has those impulsive behaviors, the more likely they are to become sexually active. So it's a correlation, but not a causation, remember. And then there's environmental factors that contribute to sexual restraint. So that would be as your intelligence increases, the likelihood of you engaging in sexual activity as a teenager decreases. Religious engagement as well, father presence, and service learning participation. Now, remember, these are just a few, and we know certainly, remember, as we said, one does not cause the other. There are many other variables that come into play as well. And another term to define here is something called sexual orientation. I know you guys have heard of this, absolutely. It's our enduring sexual attraction, usually towards members of our own sex, homosexual orientation, or the other sex, heterosexual orientation. So either one of those. Variations include attractions toward both sexes, which is what we call bisexual orientation. Today, psychologists view sexual orientation as neither willfully chosen nor willfully changed. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you're just choosing. All right, and there is a lot of discussion and there's a lot of information. Like I said, I highly recommend you read through these slides. All right, so that is it for sexual development. It's really not covered on the AP exam. The terms that I defined are the only ones that might potentially be covered. So the next module is module 51, and this is adulthood, physical, cognitive, and social development. You know, and take a moment, you know, if we had more time and we, you know, one of the things I like you to do on your own is just talk to your parents or your grandparents and ask them some questions about, you know, their experiences, whether in their physical, cognitive, and social development. And they would love to answer it. You know, I definitely know that when I ask, like, for example, my mother-in-law, when I would ask her questions about her experiences and how she's changed over time and, you know, what she's learned, you know, her wisdom, she's very willing to share. All right, so we're going to look at like all those different components: physical, cognitive, and social, just as we did with adolescence and with childhood. And think about adulthood. I know for me that when I was younger, I was very scared of becoming an adult, and especially an older adult. And I always felt like my parents seemed so old. And then, of course, now I'm one of them. And I don't feel old. So that's good news. It's not as bad as you think. But there are certainly changes. So there is a term, aging. As we age, many physical attributes and abilities we possessed when younger change significantly. And we know that. We're going to go through some of them today. So we really start to notice some changes in physical changes in middle adulthood and late adulthood. So muscular strength, reaction time, sensory keenness, and cardiac output all begin at an almost imperceptible decline in our mid-20s. Wait a minute, what? That's only a few years for you guys. So yes, there is some change. So yes, when we talk about our height, you know, we talk about, for some people, our 20s, when it comes to athletic ability, you know, that's going to be your peak, but not always, right? However, during early and middle adulthood, physical vigor has less to do with age than with a person's health and exercise habits. So we do want to remember, yes, there are changes that occur, but absolutely how you take care of yourself, your healthy lifestyle, exercising, physical, psychological well-being is going to play a big role. Adult abilities vary widely. So here we are. We have George Blair at 92, who was a barefoot water skier and had set a record at 87. So there you go. Something to look forward to. So he did die at 98. Another term, longevity. What does that mean? That means how long you live. So the oldest record of human history of someone was 122. And this was in 1998. So and this book is relatively new, this textbook, so this should be pretty accurate. So what does research show regarding longevity? I am going to read through these a little bit. From 1950 to 2015, life expectancy at birth increased worldwide to 71 years of age and to 80 beyond in 29 countries. So worldwide 71, but certain countries like Western and more industrialized countries, it is older. So in China, the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, life expectancy has risen to 76, 79, 81, 82, and 82 respectively. Today, 1 in 10 people worldwide are 60 or older. The United Nations projects that people will triple to nearly 3 in 10 by 2100. So obviously the average life expectancy is increasing with increased access to medicine and, healthier living conditions. So there is something called telomeres, and these are the tips of chromosomes, and over time they do wear down, just like the tip of a shoelace phrase. But there are certain things that can accelerate it, and that's when we talk about having a healthy lifestyle. So smoking, obesity, and stress can accelerate it. And breastfed children have longer telomeres, while those who suffer frequent abuse or bullying exhibit biological scars of shortened telomeres. So obviously, and we're going to talk about this in another unit about stress and how it does impact us physically and psychologically. All right. As telomeres shorten, aging cells may die without being replaced with perfect genetic replicas. Another term is something called the death deferral phenomenon. And it's just an interesting finding that that the actual death rate does tend to increase based on certain holidays right after certain big events or even birthdays. And males, unfortunately, are more prone to dying and dying at a younger age. The life expectancy is a little lower. So one other big thing is talking about our sensory abilities and how they do change in late adulthood. So late adulthood would be like over 55, 60. Although physical decline begins in early adulthood, we are not usually acutely aware until later in life when the stairs get steeper, the print gets smaller, and the people seem to mumble more. I'm sure you see your older family members going like this, right? And I'm starting to do that as well. Muscle strength, reaction time, and stamina also diminish, as do smell, hearing, and touch. And I don't know if I mentioned this one. Visual sharpness diminishes, as does distance perception and adaptation to light level changes. So, just a quick story, ironically enough, as I was making this video, I realized that we live in a condo and our stairwells were not lit enough. And some of our older residents were definitely concerned and potentially going to fall down the stairwell. So we put some LED lights in there to really brighten things up. So the other big thing is slowed reaction time. So that's why as you get older, you have to have other driving tests just to make sure that your reaction time is appropriate. As you can see, there is a dramatic increase in fatal accidents at a certain age because of this slowed reaction time. And, I don't know if your grandparents still drive, but. And then the brain certainly is going to be changing. It's going to take a little bit more time to solve puzzles, remember names. And there's a little bit of atrophy. Atrophy is like unused parts, and so it just, isn't working as well. The blood-brain barrier also breaks down beginning in the hippocampus, with further cognitive decline. And in early adulthood, a small gradual net loss of brain cells begins, contributing by age 80 to a brain weight reduction of 5% or so. Okay, this is sounding a little depressing. At least you don't have to worry about it for a while. What things do we remember well as we age? You certainly do. You probably have noticed that your parents and your grandparents like to reminisce and talk about stories. And certainly part of that is probably because they've told the stories many times. Remember, and more of that rehearsal and recall is going to help you, be a stronger memory. Remember LTP. But obviously significant events are going to be remembered well also. All right. So you could certainly be thinking about what are some things already that you're experiencing. Maybe this pandemic, I'm sure that will be well remembered when you're age 50. All right. And this is an interesting little, I left this one in here, even though you don't necessarily need to know it, but I thought it was really interesting. That they did this experiment where they had people watch video clips of 14 strangers saying their names. Hi, I'm Larry. And then they also gave additional details later that were like visual and voice cues. And were the results. After a second and third replay of the introductions, everyone remembered more names, but younger adults consistently surpassed the older adults. So the younger adults were remembering a lot more. And in another experiment, when asked to recognize 24 words they had earlier tried to memorize, older adults showed minimal memory decline. So when there's cues and it's recognition, you're having to recognize something, you can do very well. And we already know that recognition memory is going to be better than recall. But when you have to recall it, there is even more of a decline with older adults versus younger. And remember those studies that we use, cross-sectional, when you are studying different age groups and then comparing and contrasting them, which is what that was just describing, or if you took the same group of people and just kept studying them over a long period of time. All right, and looking at intelligence and cognition, that negative feelings and cognitive decline typically increase. Okay, so let me see. I'm kind of reading back over this and going to summarize it. So when you know that death is imminent and that it's coming, you can certainly recognize that there are going to be cognitive changes, that there is going to be sadness, more negative feelings as it's approaching. But that is not the same thing as one other thing, which we will call, these you do want to kind of generally understand what these are. They're called neurocognitive disorders. You're familiar with one of them, Alzheimer's, probably the most familiar. So they are acquired, not lifelong disorders marked by cognitive deficits. It could be through brain injury or disease or substance abuse. And it used to be called dementia, but now they have a more formal name, neurocognitive disorders. So there's many different ways that they could be caused. A series of small strokes, a brain tumor, alcohol use can progressively damage the brain, and heavy and midlife smoking more than doubles the later risk. So like I said, the most common one we know is Alzheimer's, and this is usually the onset is after age 80. It can happen earlier. And there's obviously a progressive decline in memory and other cognitive abilities. And we're going to talk about this a little later. And this is very sad, because if you do know somebody that has it, it's very sad. So there is some level of prediction through MRI scans. So if you were having an MRI scan early, early before you were actually diagnosed with Alzheimer's, that if you were showing some of these differences in your brain activity, that they might be able to predict. So they said here that there was more intense activity, yellow followed by orange and red when compared with the normal brain. So there was some level that could predict later on that you might develop Alzheimer's. Here's a question for you. If you knew that you could have testing that was going to tell you whether you're going to later on develop and be likely to develop Alzheimer's, would you want to get that test? So maybe we'll talk about that in class a little bit. Here are some other themes and influences. Many differences between younger and older adults are created by significant life events. So obviously we know that we're all going to have our different experiences. A new job means new relationships, new expectations, new demands. Marriage brings the joy of intimacy and the stress of merging two lives. The 3 years surrounding the birth of a child bring increased life satisfaction for most parents, and the death of a loved one creates an irreplaceable loss. That sounds like life right there, right? All right, so we got a couple other terms. One is called the social clock, and that is, what is the actual right time based on culture or a particular era, time period that is considered the right time to leave home, get a job, marry, have children, and retire. So when we're thinking about that in American culture today, we might say the time to leave home tends to be, if you don't go to college, maybe pretty soon after high school. But if you do go to college, you might be kind of in the home or more dependent on your parents longer. Getting a job in the 20s, right? Marrying in the late 20s, early 30s, right? Having children around that same time. And then retiring tends to be, late 50s and 60s here in the United States. But like I said, depends on the culture, the country, the era. It was certainly very different back in the 50s, 1950s. All right. So how do couples meet? I thought it's a little interesting finding here that on the internet, right? It is increasing. They did not have internet when my husband and I met. Another term, the empty nest syndrome. Have you ever heard of that? So that is when your children leave the home. So either they're going to college or they're starting their job, getting married. And there was this assumption that the couple, the parents would be, really upset and, go through levels of depression. But it says, but for most people, an empty nest is a happy place. Many parents experience a post-launch honeymoon, especially if they maintain close relationships with their children. So this quote's kind of long, and I started to read this when I started to make the video before, and I'm just going to summarize it for you. So it's basically just saying that we love our children, and we do so much for our children. We care about them. Of course, make lots of mistakes. But we hope that in the end that you will have affection for us and appreciation for us as your parents. And then obviously work, as one thing talking about as being an adult and the responsibility, financial responsibility, that work is going to play a really big role. And it's going to be challenging, but yet interesting. And, of course, if I was going to give you advice, obviously you need that job that's going to financially keep you independent and keep you comfortable. But you also want to find work that is purposeful and feels good and feels right to you. We are very social creatures, whether you're a child, an adolescent, or an adult. That we definitely find greater happiness when spending time with others generally. But some of us may be introverts, right? And we need our solitude. We need our time to ourselves. Very important as well. Everything that we talk about throughout the year, we always want to go back to this common theme that there are many, many variables that come into play that show the complexity of us as human beings. We have biological influences that are going to affect aging. We have psychological influences that are going to influence aging. And then we have social cultural influences. So biological, obviously we're going to have some genetic predispositions to potentially maybe certain disease or to longevity, to live a long life. We may have some psychological influences, just how our overall outlook on life and our lifestyle. And then our social cultural is obviously, where we live, the community we live in, is there respect for the aging? Are there safe living conditions and things of that sort? And one other encouraging news, because I feel like we hear a lot of negative changes that occur, is we start to mellow our emotions. Now, maybe I guess the negative of that is maybe we don't get overly excited over really positive experiences, but yet we also don't get really upset over really negative experiences. So it says highs become less high and lows less low. Compliments provoke less elation and criticisms less despair, as both become merely additional feedback atop a mountain of accumulated praise and blame. As we age, life therefore becomes less of an emotional roller coaster. So for some of us, we might see that as good news. All right. At 20, we worry about what others think of us. At 40, we don't care what other thinks of us. At 60, we discovered that they haven't been thinking about us at all. Now that's kind of extreme. I don't necessarily agree with that quote. I mean, I think the greater point is maybe when we're younger and we're more concerned about peers and, worrying about what people are thinking, getting easily embarrassed. At 40, we are less worried about that less. And we don't care. We're starting to really make our own individual 100% decisions. But at 60, I would not necessarily say that I'm looking back and thinking nobody ever was thinking about us. Maybe I might realize they don't think about it as much as I thought they thought about me, but. And the last, we know that if we are going to talk about the lifespan, at the end of life is death. And, be thinking about terminally ill patients and how they respond when they first get the news that they are terminally ill. And this is some of the information that we have. Terminally ill and bereaved people do not go through identical predictable stages, such as denial before anger. There used to be stages that were taught, and we found that it's a very individual experience. Those who express the strongest grief immediately do not purge their grief more quickly. Grieving spouses who talk often with others or receive grief counseling adjust about as well as those who grieve more privately. So, greater point here, it depends on the individual, and you need to respect the individual's way of grieving. Now, we say this with terminally ill patients, but we also want to add, if you have a loved one that is dying, or a loved one that has passed away, we also mean that in the same way too, that it's an individual grieving process. And reviewing life with a sense of integrity. So remember Erik Erikson, which I talked about in the other video, has all those different stages. The last stage, remember, is integrity versus despair. And that is going to have that general sense of feeling life was purposeful and good, and they haven't run out of time to do some of the things that they wanted to do. Which of the following would be considered an example of Erikson's concept of integrity? You got it again. An 85-year-old looks back at life well lived and feels satisfied. And here's the last question. Which of the following changes does not occur with age? See if you remember that from earlier in this video. Believe it or not, this one is not C. So all of the other ones do occur with age, but the lens of the eye becomes more transparent. Yeah, that is not one of the changes, but visual sharpness does diminish, distance perception is less acute, and and adaptation light level changes is less rapid, and sense of smell and hearing diminish. And I think that's it. All right, have a wonderful day, and give your parents and grandparents a hug if you can. All right, and I think because that's allowed now. if they've been vaccinated. All right. Okay. Have a good day, everybody.